Each of us has a unique career story to tell. For some, these fly high like rocket launches. For others, they're more like the game of chutes and ladders, with advances and setbacks along the way. Either way, we learn countless lessons from these experiences. And that's what we put into the spotlight here at Career Sessions Career Lessons. Join discussions featuring a variety of guests sharing their stories of ups and downs, as well as the secrets of their success and what drives them to continue moving forward. We break down the tools and resources that will help you establish your dream career and realize your professional goals. Here's your host, J.R. Lowry.
Welcome to Career Sessions, Career Lessons. I am J.R. Lowry, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming John Judge to the show. John's career thus far spans the nonprofit sector, government service, and some time doing real estate development and construction. His nonprofit stops read like a who's who in recognizable names: the Boy Scouts, Goodwill, Habitat for Humanity, work in support of AmeriCorps, and most recently, he's been serving as president and CEO of the Appalachian Mountain Club. He's on the verge of starting a new role as president and CEO of the Trustees of Reservations in Massachusetts, which is the nation's oldest land trust. He's a Boston native, a graduate of Stonehill College in Easton, Mass., where my wife also went to school, and a holder of a master's degree in public administration from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. John, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. So you were, let's dive in. You're Boston born and raised. What was your first job, when you were a kid?
I think my first job was probably, I had a paper route. The paper route included the Milton Hospital, which was tough for a kid, to be delivering newspapers to hospital rooms. But
yeah,
I think, the nurses and the doctors back at that time said, hey, go in, you're going to cheer them up. And everyone's scrambling to try to find a quarter and buy a newspaper.
Yeah.
And then I would caddy on the weekends, so Saturday and Sundays, I'd caddy at the local golf course. And I remember these guys who had, a 1,200-pound bag, a small Toyota golf bag that had everything in it. I mean, ridiculous number of clubs. And they'd give me $20 to carry doubles for 18 holes. And, but back in the 80s, that was pretty good. Great exercise and not bad money. So those are two of my early jobs. And then in high school, I started a landscaping company. So I landscape different homes around in neighborhoods near me.
Cool. Yeah, I as I've told others who I've done episodes with, I mowed lawns as a kid. I never graduated into full-on landscaping. I pretty much just mow the lawns. When you were, back in your teenage years, did you envision at that point that you wanted to do something in the nonprofit sector? When did that idea really kind of emerge for you?
Yeah, I think, just in terms of nonprofit as a job, I always admired organizations, with strong missions. But when I was in Stonehill, I was interested in economics, and essentially my sub major in econ was monetary economics, and thought I'd go work for a bank. And I was pretty close to taking a job with the Boston company, which eventually merged with Mellon Bank. And then somebody from the Boy Scouts called me up and said, hey, you've worked summer camp with the Boy Scouts. This is an extension of that, come work for us and become a professional scouter. So I said to my parents and myself, I'll do it for a couple of years. It will be kind of like my service. And this is before AmeriCorps.
Right.
But a couple of years turned into, 6 years. And then I had a chance to move somewhere else in the country with them and got a couple job offers. One was in Maryland, and I said no. And in scouting, you have to continue to kind of move up the ranks, if you will.
Right.
And if you don't do that, they say that you're not serious about becoming a professional scouter. So at that point, that's when I went to Goodwill Industries. But I've always loved having a mission and selling the mission versus trying to sell a widget or something. That really appealed to me. It's ironic though, because during my summers at Stonehill, I paid for my tuition by virtue of selling cars. I sold Hyundais.
Oh yeah.
7 days a week, 80, 90 hours a week. And
wow.
So part of me was probably pretty burnt out, having done that 4 summers in a row, with
imagine.
no real summer fun. But it was a great sales experience. And I think, fundraising, there's a lot of sales.
Oh yeah.
That's needed to be a good fundraiser. So it translated for me.
Yeah. What did you do when you were working for the Boy Scouts?
I started out as they have you start out as a district executive. So they give you a number of communities. And I had inner city Boston when I started out. Had a great boss. His name was Pete Washington, my first boss out of college. And, he really instilled in me the opportunities that we had to partner with, churches and schools and synagogues and, other organizations to try to get scouting, throughout communities, whether it be Dorchester or Mattapan, wherever. He was a lifelong scouter and this tall, gregarious, smart guy, African-American guy, and just really helped me in terms of, better understanding, how to connect with untapped communities and meet people where they are in terms of partnering in building a relationship versus transactional. He was just a wonderful relationship person and a great boss for me. And then after that, at the Scouts, I kind of moved into more of a fundraising role, and that's the one that I ended with was development and marketing. And at the time, we had a partnership with Arnold Advertising, the group that made the Drivers Wanted campaign. And I was very fortunate. I got a chance to know Ed Eskandarian, who was the CEO at the time, and Fran Kelly, who was the president, who's actually a neighbor of mine now. But, they had said to me when I was thinking about leaving the Scouts, would you want to work at Arnold? And they set up a couple of days for me to just go around and shadow some folks. And it was really a wonderful thing to do. And it gave me, I still have a lifelong interest in marketing, but I said to myself, I don't want to work at an ad agency.
Yeah.
So from there, a job opened up at Goodwill Industries in fundraising, grant writing, direct mail. Yeah.
It's great that they gave you that opportunity. I mean, back then that wasn't really a common thing to do. Now it's getting more common for people to ask you to shadow so they can see what it's like. Other than having to deal with any sort of, safety confidentiality issues in your workplace. I mean, it's a great way for you to be able to help somebody understand whether they really want to do the job.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I've had a couple people ask me, to come in and grab a cup of coffee. But the shadowing thing is a huge commitment, especially if it's all on you.
Oh yeah.
In terms of, somebody wants to come in and walk around with you for the day. It's a lot, so, I'd be interested to hear from you and others, what's kind of the hybrid that might be out there, but
Yeah, one of my former McKinsey colleagues actually was starting a company. We talked probably a year ago about a year ago, and the company basically was giving you. It was sort of a platform that existed between companies who are, maybe looking for a different way to attract talent and people who wanted to see what a job is like. It was like a matching platform for exactly what you did in a very kind of old school way with Arnold. So a few years at Goodwill then, and then you went to Habitat for Humanity, right?
Yeah, it was a year and a half at Goodwill, and I was it was actually at State Street, JR.
Oh, yeah.
I was at a nonprofit leadership kind of reception at State Street. And I was talking with a great woman named Sandra Butler from Dorchester, and I asked her what the pin was on her lapel, and she said, "Oh, it's Habitat for Humanity." And we got to talking, and I said, "Oh, I've always wanted to come out and swing a hammer." And she said, "Well, would you be interested in being our executive director?" And I said, "Yeah, I would be interested in that." And so one thing led to another, and I came in, and it was Habitat for Humanity Roxbury. They were just focused, pretty much on Roxbury, and it was in tough shape. Thanks to Sandra and other volunteers, they were turning the corner, but it was almost disaffiliated.
Really,
it just hadn't been building any houses, and so it was a turnaround situation for me, including digging them out of debt. But it was a wonderful experience and gave me some really deep knowledge of Dorchester, Roxbury, and we did other projects throughout the greater Boston area, including in communities like Needham and Newton. So it was interesting, and then doing projects in South Boston, and but I think one of the things again was the power of partnerships that I learned in that job. The African Methodist Episcopal churches, the AME churches, really embraced me and helped me succeed. And a lot of folks in the community, Mrs. Lila Fredericks, who has a middle school named after her now. She passed away a few years ago, but a great lady originally from the South. But, here she is standing up at a community meeting, and when people weren't letting me talk, and she said, "Let Mr. Judge speak," and everyone, stopped talking. And
right.
I remember a couple of young men said, "Be quiet." Mrs. Frederick said, "Be quiet." So it was, Habitat was just a powerful experience in terms of, partnering with faith communities, partnering with corporate entities like the New Balances of the world. I had the Davises came out from New Balance, and other corporate partners, Channel 5 WCVB, which is the ABC affiliate in Boston, came out one time, and the general manager said to me, "Why don't more people know about this?" And Karen Ward, who is the head of community affairs for Channel 5, looked at the general manager, and she said, "Well, you're in a position where people can know more about this," so they've really helped put us on the map, and we grew exponentially, and became one of the best performing urban Habitat for Humanities. And I earned my construction license at the time, and so I had a construction supervisor's license, and learned a lot about zoning and permitting in the city, and working with folks at City Hall. So it really was a wonderful experience. And I think I was just 30 at the time when I took it over. So to be a young, CEO of of a turnaround situation, it was a great learning platform.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's a, kind of a young age to be dealing with that kind of situation. Were there other things that you learned from that turnaround that you kind of took with you in the, years of your career since then?
From a hope standpoint and a perseverance standpoint, it was, nothing is insurmountable. I mean, I could tell you stories about, it was a tough sled for the first couple of years there. I was, going out at 3:00 in the morning to, a neighborhood in Dorchester to take care of a broken water pipe that was, pouring out into the street, and the neighbors saying, what's what's going on, and we're in some cases we're having tools stolen multiple times, even though they were locked up, and but we persevered, and I think the partnership element has always been one that I think is really important. Picking the right partners, and working on the stewardship of those relationships, making sure that they're getting something out of it too. That's not a one-sided partnership, and then having a little bit of an abundance mentality. I think you need it when you're fundraising. You're saying to somebody, hey, would you write a check for $5,000? And the person might laugh and say, gee, I don't write a check for $5,000 anything. How can you ask me for that? And
right.
But that's kind of the worst case scenario. Most people would say, oh, gee, I'm flattered that you think I can write a check for $5,000. I will give you a check for $500 because I believe in what you're doing. But I think especially with fundraising, you have to go in with that mentality that the money is out there.
Yeah.
Because and it's similar to looking for a job, right? You can't start out by saying, hey, there's nothing out there, and then go out every day and beat the bushes. You really have to go out with hey, I'm going to find the best gig for me, and it's going to take some work, and it's going to take some time, and it's going to take a lot of networking, but I will get it. So from a perseverance standpoint, I think anybody running a nonprofit, you really have to have perseverance, and then hope, and then this belief that what you're selling is going to appeal to folks, that they will want to support and give to. And if you don't have those things, then you're better off going for something else that you're passionate about, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So then you went to Kennedy School at some point around that time. What drove your decision to go to get your master's in public administration?
I was thinking about, I got into an MBA program at UMass Boston, and it might have been me only taking a couple classes. But it was through the MBA program. One was on, information systems, IT, and another one I think was on management. And they weren't as interesting as I had hoped.
Yeah.
So I came home, and I was living in Dorchester at the time, and just had a yellow paper moment where, you put the pros and the cons on both sides. And I'm just really interested in policy and in leadership. And I remember somebody had told me about the MPA program at Suffolk, for instance, and I looked into that. And then somebody told me about the MPA program at Harvard, and I looked into that, and was really honored to get into the Harvard program, and got in and didn't know how I was going to pay for it, so I deferred for a year.
Yeah.
So I think I started when I was 31, and I was the only one who was working full time and going through the program. And
wow.
A month before graduation, the dean, Sue Williamson, pulled me into her office, and she was like, "How could you do this? This is ridiculous. You're making a mockery of this program." And she was a terrific supporter, and wrote a letter for me to get into a doctorate program after that. I decided not to do it, but I got in. So, she and I were friends, but she really said to me, this was supposed to be your full-time,
focus,
and not having a full-time job. So I was still running Habitat for Humanity, and then going to school, jumping on the train, heading over there, taking classes, continuing to grow Habitat. But I didn't want to get out with, $100,000 in debt.
Yeah.
And thankfully I didn't. I think they gave me a half a scholarship, which is a lot at the time.
Yeah.
But I love the Kennedy School. I mean, it was just amazing to be able to I took a couple of classes at Harvard Business School. One Rosabeth Moss Cantor taught, took some at Harvard University for Roger Porter, taught a great class on leadership, and took a great class on leadership with David Gergen, and a few other people on nonprofit management. So it really was a wonderful experience and an opportunity to kind of pick and choose what you wanted to do in terms of designing your own program versus going somewhere else where they might have kind of a rigid, hey, these are the core courses that you need to take, and you can't be going off and taking a leadership class over at another school or a design class at another school. So it spoke to me, because I feel like from a change the world standpoint, having that opportunity to learn more about leadership and policy was a great thing for me.
So it sounds like, despite the fact that you were a full-time student and a full-time, running Habitat for Humanity, and in Boston, you view it as a good experience and worth the time.
Yeah, very much so. I loved it. I'll tell you, a tough experience I had was I was leaving I had a 2-year contract in Springfield, and it was 2011. So it was the 10th anniversary of my graduating class at Harvard.
Yeah.
And I went back, and I just left Springfield. My father had passed away recently, and I was dealing with my mother's kind of health issues. She was having, some early dementia kind of issues. And I went to this alumni event, and I sat in the back of the room, and they started to go around the room, and each person was upping the next person. It was almost like a Facebook commercial, people showing the restaurants that they go to and the meals that they had, and the next person trying to up it, with a better bottle of wine or whatever. But so I slipped out the back, and because I didn't want to have to go into the fact that I did not have a job at the time, and so, just in terms of any of your listeners, I really feel like, the opportunities are out there, and to just give it time and to really work it on so many different angles. And then also think about what I like to call bridge kind of jobs. Think about jobs that will help you get to where you really want to be, versus holding out for this, panacea kind of, somebody's going to pay me 5X and I'm going to have this title and I'm going to be able to work in this kind of building and have this many weeks vacation, rather than kind of hold out for that perfect ideal, go for the bridge job. And in coming away from Springfield, I had a couple of opportunities to stay in city and state government, a couple of offers. And I said to myself, no, I think I really want to get into nonprofit. And I'm glad I kind of pushed back and not just took the first couple of jobs that came my way. Because that's when the Appalachian Mountain Club came knocking and said, hey, we know you're an Eagle Scout. We're looking for somebody who has urban experience and fundraising experience. We see you have. So would you be interested in throwing your hat in the ring for this? And, the rest is history.
Yeah. I mean, just listening to this story up until now, it's like, you took your job at the Boy Scouts, you got a taste of the nonprofit world, you went to Goodwill, you had kind of the marketing, fundraising piece there that sort of combined, to position you through, the time you spent at Habitat for Humanity. You got to run something, you had turnaround experience, and, all the relationships that you've described along the way that sort of, helped you sort of flow your way, along both, through those different groups and then your time in the Kennedy School and since then. And, it all kind of leads up to, you look at your resume and you say, okay, there's a lot of great things that this guy can add, coming in and running an outdoor focused club, right? Conservation, recreation, all of that. So it's a great example of, maybe not through intent, but sort of accumulating the relationships and the skills along the way that sort of, as you say, one thing builds to another. And you combine that with having a strong sense of what you wanted to do and holding out for it. And as you say, the rest is history.
Yeah.
So it's been 10 years at the Appalachian Mountain Club. Hiking, outdoor activities, particularly in the time of COVID, are at an all-time high. A lot of people, would look at that job as a dream job. Was it a dream job for you? Has it been a dream job for you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's bittersweet to leave. I had so many people during the past 10 years. My friend Newt, who's a lawyer in Boston, Nuke, would introduce me and say, this guy's got the best job in America. And I would not, I really feel like it was the best job in America, and having an opportunity to work for AMC has been a real honor, and it's been a blast too. It's given me a chance to be entrepreneurial and to put some of, for instance, my economic development work from Springfield to work, as we work with these rural communities, helping them with economic development related investments, whether it be building new lodges and this Piscataquis County, one of the poorest counties in the United States, to the work that we're doing in northern New Hampshire, to the work of conservation. We've really tried to lift AMC's voice when it comes to conservation policy. And we finished, we're leading the Land Water Conservation Fund Coalition, a 1,200 member coalition, a national coalition. And we're able to do that and be a success, getting what was called the Great American Outdoors Act passed and funding the Land Water Conservation Fund at $990 million a year, because we're nonpartisan, to be able to get into the offices of Republicans, Democrats, Independents. So that was that was great. So getting to put on great programs, working with 16,000 volunteers, the whole lodging business, 200,000 or so overnight guests, so a big hospitality operation, and then the conservation research, conservation policy, and my favorite was trail building and trail maintenance. Growing that. We're doing trail work now in Valley Forge and Acadia and Baxter, and of course all around the White Mountains. So it was really a great job. And the trustees called me, the Trustees of Reservations, which is another venerable nonprofit organization and name, called me I think at the end of May, and said, "Hey, would you be interested in throwing your hat in the ring for this?" And I was like, I really love my job. I love being at AMC, but I also think, 10 years is a great run. And the past couple years, as you know, for CEOs, I don't care if you're running the neighborhood grocery store or a small restaurant or a Liberty Mutual or Coca-Cola. I mean, whatever it is in between, it's been a tough time to be a worker, of course, but I think a very tough time to be a CEO. And I see it in how our leaders have aged, So it was an opportune call for me, because it gave me a chance to sit down and say, okay, I've had 10 great years. This is a wonderful time to hand off AMC. It's doing so well. We just hit, new historic highs with fundraising. And I know we're coming out of, COVID soon, and we have advanced registrations for next year's huts and lodges that are way above. So I felt like it was a good time to hand it off. And it was also good for me at this, I'm still in my early 50s, to say, here's another challenge.
Yeah.
And it's my curiosity around the trustees reaching out, led to me reading about them online and understanding what they were talking about in terms of coastal resiliency. And it tied in with a lot of the concepts that I wrote about in a book I wrote a couple of years ago called The Outdoor Citizen, which talks about a number of things, the outdoor city, for instance, really making the outdoors more of in nature a central pillar of urban life. And then this idea of a next ecology and amplification of nature system services, and our conservation stewardship and our harmonious, living with nature, and our responsibility for living with nature. So the trustees are doing they have 125 or so properties across Massachusetts, but they own 120 miles of coastline in Massachusetts.
Wow.
And so thinking about what we can do to boost coastline and nature system services, but what are we doing for the most vulnerable neighborhoods, which are going to be hard hit by extreme weather events?
Right.
How are we working on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and making sure everybody knows that the outdoors belongs to everybody? I mean, the outdoors for too long has been the bastion of, white wealthy folks, and just, really moving the needle on that is going to take, an organization like the trustees leading on a number of fronts. So the urban connection or the urban opportunity that I had with the trustees, including they manage the Boston Community Gardens program. So they've got dozens of community gardens in the city of Boston. We're planning a a park, Pierce Park 3 on Boston Harbor, raising money for that now. I think we're at about 28 million, but need to raise 36 million. So to me, that really excited me and tied in with a lot of my work as a chief city planner and head of economic development, and a community developer in the Habitat for Humanity side of things, and then all the conservation related work and nature stewardship work like trail building that I did at AMC. So I'm excited about it. I'm excited about the change, but the challenge and learning a new organization and helping to, carry on the great work of my friend Barbara Erickson, who was the CEO, who passed away. She had battled cancer, and she's a young woman in her 40s, and just a wonderful leader and inspiring. And so I feel very blessed to get a chance to continue her work, and then take the Trustees mission and really connect it with folks that are living in cities or folks in untapped communities, and then hopefully continue to do what I think is happening, JR, during this time of COVID. I call it the great outdoor reset.
Yeah.
Like you said at the top of your program, more people are getting the outdoors, and I think more people are getting the outdoors. More people appreciate nature. They know they need nature, but there's also, I think, a greater recognition around the sense of urgency with climate change.
Yeah.
So I think we have a real big opportunity, leadership opportunity, and a leadership responsibility at the Trustees to lead on those front, on all those fronts, in terms of outdoor engagement. But also DEI and getting more folks involved with the work of the Trustees, with pathways to jobs, and then also on the climate change side of things. We really have an opportunity, I think, in Boston and in Massachusetts to be a leader on climate resiliency. And I mean, you come to Boston, you fly in, and with sea level rise, we are in trouble. We need to act now. We can't wait 10 years to do it. So that's I know, long-winded answer, but it's bittersweet to leave AMC, but I think it's a great time to pass the baton, and then a good time for me to take on a new challenge.
Yeah. It's, just listening to you describe it, it's, as you say, it's a new challenge. 10 years, it's a good run as a CEO. Although one of the things I noticed about the Trustees is you're going to be the fifth leader in 130 years, which, is pretty mind blowing. They've had some very long-term leaders there in the past. But as you say, 10 years is a good run, and it's a fresh challenge, and it allows you to kind of dive deeper on topics like, as you say, conservation, diversity, getting a broader mix of people out into the outdoors. So it's all good. For somebody who, a lot of people think about nonprofit careers, right? And I think they probably, underestimate how much work it is, how much you're constantly in fundraising mode. What advice would you have for someone to figure out whether nonprofit is really what they want to do?
I would start out, number one, by having folks realize it's a business. So you can't come in and say to folks, hey, I'm from XYZ Corporation, or I'm from this university, or whatever. This is how we do things there, and I'm gonna turn things a little differently here at this nonprofit. So sometimes you hear that from folks. There's an underestimation in terms of the seriousness of the work. And, when people come in, they're like, wow, this is a complicated business. And I didn't realize there were so many pieces to this. And you have the same relationship issues with staff, but then you also have this added layer of volunteer relationships,
Yeah.
So I would recommend that people, number one, think about what they're most passionate about. They might be working for Habitat for Humanity or a great job training program. Goodwill Industries does job training. There's programs like Year Up, Jumpstart, City Year. And then there are conservation organizations like the Trustees and like AMC. So once you find out what you're passionate about, think about the area where you can contribute the most. If you're right out of college, you obviously have a chance to start at ground zero and then keep going up. But for other folks that might be coming in and looking at this as a second career, think about where you can contribute the most, and then come into it with some humility. I think that's where folks go wrong. They come in and they're like, oh gee, this is terrible that this has been like this at this nonprofit for 5 years. I'm gonna come in and change it tomorrow. And for some people, maybe they can do it, but for the majority of folks, they're going to say, wow, this is a lot harder than I expected. And I think understanding also, trying to read up on where things are going, would it be, on the IT and digital front, would it be, the science of climate change, whatever area under the nonprofit umbrella that you want to get into, I would do one's research and look into, hey, what's the new innovation that's coming down the pike, and then have a chance to sit down with a couple folks that work in those sectors who you really respect or have followed or have done some research on, and learn what a typical day is like for that person. So again, the passion thing, do what you're really passionate about. Come into it with humility, knowing that there are people that have been, really working hard, grinding away for decades, trying to move the needle on it. You've got to come in and be willing to work shoulder to shoulder and not be, judgmental. And then, opportunities, be a little bit of your own futurist and do research as to where that organization is going and where the future jobs might be at that organization. And then sit down with a couple folks that you admire, again, in that sector, to glean what their typical day is like, and inform your decision on whether or not you want to take it to the next level. And that next level could be similar to shadowing, JR, which is try to be an Uber volunteer, say, hey, I'd like to come in and volunteer, 10 hours a week to start. It really gives you a sense of, how the organization runs. And it's also a little bit of a rehearsal too, in the event that, hey, if you're a great volunteer, you have a chance that they might offer you a job at that place.
Right. Yeah. And particularly, you're leaving an organization that obviously has a massive volunteer army, supporting the mission. And and especially in organizations like that, it's a lot easier to come in and, give that kind of experience a try, because there's just so many places that volunteer help can be used.
Yeah. Yeah, true.
If you had to do everything all over again so far, would you do anything differently?
I don't think so. I look back, and of course, you regret mistakes, and you regret, not being your best, and so on. And I think there are many times when I said, "Oh, gee, why did I do that?" or "Why did I say that?" I mean, the toughest, one of the toughest points career-wise in my life was to leave Habitat for Humanity and start a for-profit real estate development company in 2005. And I had a 2-year window where I was doing really well. And then, everything hit the fan in 2007, 2008,
right.
where banks literally changed the, they call it the loan to value ratio, or LTV, where
Right.
they'd say, "Hey, this is what you need, and now we're going to change it. So you need to put an extra $500,000 down," or whatever. And I was bootstrapping everything. And so that was particularly tough, especially to have, friends lose money. No one lost more than me. But to be in that situation was really, really difficult. And, unfortunately, lost, some friendships with folks that just didn't understand that, despite, my best efforts, the world came tumbling down. And I remember talking with, developers that had billion-dollar portfolios, and they said to me that people weren't lending to them at that time, So I think it gave me, it certainly humbles you when you trip and when you fail like that, but it also, I think, puts things in perspective that, you've got to do your best, and sometimes you're going to fail, but you need to move on, and that failure doesn't have to be your scarlet letter that you wear the rest of your life. And so I think for each one of us, the opportunity to take some smart risks, and if you're going to fail, they always say, fail fast, and
right.
but learn from that, and take that humility and empathy and love for your fellow human being onto the next thing. But I think learning from every victory and every defeat is really important. My mother would say, in terms of criticism, she'd say, "Oh, believe 50% of your criticism and 50% of your praise." So
right.
Don't, you're kind of somewhere in the middle. But I think we have an incredibly connected world right now, where you can, through LinkedIn, reach out and talk with, JR or in London, or Susan in Arizona. But thinking about, really reaching out and using that network and the friends of the friends kind of network that you never would have been able to see before. And now you can see it on LinkedIn and other platforms. So I really think that every person that's listening, to try to have an abundance kind of mentality that, there are jobs out there that you will want, and they will want you, and trying to create as many connections or bridges to get you there, and have some patience, knowing that it might not be your ideal job tomorrow, but maybe it's a job that is a giant step toward that ideal, whatever it might be down the road.
I mean, you were likening it to fundraising earlier, and I mean, for me, in some ways, that finding a job is it's probably easier than fundraising, because in fundraising it's again and again and again and again, and in a job it's you just got to get one match, right? At least at a time. I mean, you may have obviously multiple points in your life, your working life, where you have to find a job, but at any point in time, you just need to find one that's a match. So you meanwhile, as a fundraiser, need to go out and keep asking for, more and more checks till you hit that $8 million that you still need for the work that you want to do for the park in Boston. And that's just one of your projects.
Right.
Yeah. Any final thoughts to share?
I'm reading a book now on AI and how it's going to change the workforce and so on. It's just such an interesting time for us to, be in the world and contribute to a nonprofit, to contribute to an organization, to contribute to a mission. So my advice is, obviously have patience and try to use every tool that you have, like LinkedIn and otherwise, to get you there. But it's exciting. Think about the opportunities and aim high and don't give up.
Great. All right. Well, that wraps up this episode of Career Sessions. I'd like to thank my guest, John Judge, for joining me today, sharing his career story, talking in abundance about the relationships that he's built and the learnings that he's gleaned along the way. So John, thank you again for joining.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. Take care. Happy New Year.
Yep. Same to you. And have a great day, everyone.
Thank you for listening to Career Sessions, Career Lessons. We hope the nuggets of wisdom shared today help guide your path to the successful career of your dreams. This podcast series is part of Pathwise.io, which is here to help you live the career you want. We provide a comprehensive mix of career and professional development events, insights, tools, and exercises backed by a group of leading coaches and other career management experts. If you aspire to something more or just something different in your career, join us at Pathwise.io. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. See you again on the next episode.